When Kellyanne Conway delivered her remarks during that panel, it was clear that she was relying on something she has mastered over years of public appearances. Tone. Her voice carried authority, the kind that can easily sway an audience before they even process the substance of what is being said. This has long been one of her strongest tools. She has a way of leaning into the microphone, punctuating her sentences with sharp pauses, and using a confident delivery that makes her words sound larger than life. For many listeners, that alone can create the impression of dominance in a debate. But as the exchange with Jasmine Crockett revealed, tone without the weight of genuine substance can only carry so far. And when someone responds with grounded facts, the difference between performance and content becomes unmistakable. When Conway challenged Crockett, she presented her criticism with a dismissive tone. She painted Crockett's ideas as impractical, suggesting that they were more for headlines than for implementation. In the moment, Conway's delivery felt firm, almost rehearsed, designed to sting and to draw murmurs from the audience. This is where the subtle difference between tone and substance becomes most visible. The tone was sharp, but the argument itself wasn't deeply layered. It was more of a strategic jab than a comprehensive case against Crockett's credibility. Crockett's response, however, shifted the balance almost immediately. Instead of mirroring Conway's energy, she chose stillness. Her tone was calm, even measured, but what she brought to the table was substance. She didn't reach for theatrics, she reached for facts. She highlighted Conway's record, pointing out clear instances where Conway's public defensive positions had been inconsistent with later remarks. In doing this, Crockett didn't just defend herself, she turned the spotlight back on Conway, forcing the audience to consider the reliability of the person making the critique. The moment worked not because Crockett was louder or sharper, but because her substance held up under scrutiny. What made this exchange striking was the contrast between the two approaches. Conway, as she has done in countless interviews, leaned on her skill to control a room with her tone. Crockett leaned on her ability to anchor her response in verifiable substance. The impact of the latter far outweighed the former. The silence that followed wasn't born from shock at a loud retort, but from the recognition that a calm dismantling of an argument can sometimes speak louder than the most confident delivery. Audiences, particularly in political debates, often find themselves swayed by tone. A forceful delivery can give the impression of strength and clarity even when the words themselves don't hold much ground. Conway has excelled in that domain for years. Yet, in this particular exchange, Crockett exposed the limitations of relying on tone alone. When substance enters the room, tone has to match it or risk falling flat. This moment also illustrates a broader truth about public discourse. Tone can capture attention, but substance is what endures. People may remember the way Conway delivered her critique, but they remember Crockett's reply because it left them with something to think about. Crockett's words didn't just sound good in the moment, they carried weight beyond the room. They reminded those listening that political debate is not only about who sounds more confident, but also about who can stand on the stronger foundation of truth and accountability. Conway's reliance on tone was not without effect. It did set the stage and made her presence felt, as it often does. But Crockett's reliance on substance was what defined the exchange. And it was in that contrast, tone versus substance, that the audience witnessed why grounded replies often leave the deepest impression, even in the face of sharp criticism. When Jasmine Crockett took the microphone after Kellyanne Conway's pointed remarks, the room was still humming with the energy Conway had stirred up. Conway had leaned heavily on her trademark sharpness, delivering her criticism with a tone designed to cut and to command the space. But what unfolded next revealed something crucial about public exchanges. Strength can often carry more influence than any forceful delivery. Crockett didn't match Conway's volume, nor did she try to outshine her theatrics. Instead, she chose composure, and in doing so, she shifted the entire mood of the room. Crockett's decision to remain calm was not a sign of weakness. It was strategy. She understood that if she mirrored Conway's energy, the debate would quickly spiral into a back and forth where substance would be drowned out by noise. By lowering her tone, by pacing her words, she created a rhythm that forced the audience to lean in and actually listen. Her strength was not in overpowering Conway, but in disarming her by refusing to play the same game. What makes calm strength so effective in moments like this is that it reframes the power dynamic. Conway's style thrives when opponents become flustered or defensive. It's in those moments that her tone dominates and her confidence becomes the story. But Crockett didn't give her that opening. She remained steady, eyes focused, voice controlled, and instead of reacting emotionally, she responded with precision. That type of calmness creates a presence that is impossible to ignore, not because it is loud, but because it is undeniably secure. The content of Crockett's clapback was amplified by the way she delivered it. She pointed to Conway's past contradictions, reminding the audience that words spoken with confidence are not always built on consistency. She did not shout, she did not mock, she simply stated facts in a steady, unwavering tone. In doing this, She demonstrated that strength isn't always about matching energy, but about controlling the tempo of a conversation. The audience felt the shift. The air in the room changed from reactive murmurs to an attentive silence. Asterisk. Calm strength has another advantage. It unsettles the person on the other side. Conway, who often dominates exchanges through her ability to rattle opponents, suddenly found herself in a position where her sharp tone had no effect. The usual rhythm of Kellyanne's response, the cycle of critique and fiery rebuttal, was broken. Instead of seeing Crockett lose her footing, Conway was met with a steady hand and a composed reply. That steadiness is what left her little space to counter. The more Crockett remained calm, the less Conway's forceful tone seemed effective. Asterisk. This moment also highlights something broader about political and public life. Audiences are often drawn to fireworks, too heated clashes, and quotable but what resonates beyond the moment is composure under pressure. Crockett showed that strength isn't always visible in loud gestures. Sometimes it's in the refusal to be shaken. That kind of calm strength has staying power because it reflects confidence not just in oneself, but in the truth of one's words. Asterisk. Conway's presence in the room was undeniable. She is seasoned, practiced, and skilled at making her remarks land. Yet, when faced with Crockett's calm strength, her usual advantages diminished. The silence that followed Crockett's response wasn't the aftermath of noise, but the recognition that someone had just turned the tide of the conversation without needing to raise their voice. Calmness, in that instance, was the loudest sound in the room. Asterisk. The exchange serves as a reminder that strength doesn't always need to roar. Sometimes, it simply needs to stand firm, unbothered, and precise. Crockett's calm approach did more than answer Conway. It showed the audience that composure under fire can carry more weight than any sharp tone ever could. Asterisk. When Jasmine Crockett delivered her reply to Kellyanne Conway, what made it resonate so deeply wasn't just her composure or her tone. It was the way she shifted the conversation to accountability. Conway had come prepared with sharp criticisms, casting Crockett as inexperienced and suggesting her ideas were little more than lofty promises. It was a familiar strategy from Conway, who has built her reputation on quick, cutting remarks that often leave opponents scrambling to defend themselves. But Crockett didn't stay on the defensive. Instead, she turned the focus directly back onto Conway, making accountability the centerpiece of her response. Asterisk. What Crockett did was simple, yet powerful. She reminded the audience of Conway's own record. Rather than merely denying the charges Conway threw at her, Crockett questioned how someone with a history of defending shifting narratives and controversial positions could credibly judge another's consistency. By pointing to specific examples where Conway's words and actions had not aligned, Crockett brought substance to her claim. It wasn't an attack for the sake of spectacle. It was a careful reframing of the conversation that said, in effect, before you question me, let's examine your own track record. Asterisk. Accountability has a way of changing the power dynamics in a debate. Conway's remarks were aimed at undermining Crockett's credibility, but Crockett's response flipped the script by asking the audience to weigh credibility on both sides. When Crockett calmly raised the issue of Conway's contradictions, defending certain narratives when convenient and shifting positions when those narratives fell apart, it forced the audience to think critically about who was truly standing on firmer ground. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just responding, she was holding Conway to the same standard that Conway had tried to apply to her. Asterisk. This tactic worked because accountability speaks louder than theatrics. Conway's style thrives on confidence and tone. She knows how to sound convincing even when the substance may be thin. But accountability doesn't rely on tone. It relies on facts. Crockett wasn't simply debating her. She was fact-checking her in real time, and doing so without raising her voice. The audience, already primed by Conway's sharp delivery, suddenly found themselves comparing the weight of her criticisms with the weight of Crockett's evidence. That comparison was not favorable to Conway. Asterisk. What made the moment more striking was the way Crockett avoided personal insult. She didn't descend into name-calling or emotional sparring. She stayed on the terrain of accountability. That discipline gave her words extra credibility because she wasn't trying to score easy points. She was highlighting an inconsistency that the audience could recognize for themselves. By doing so, she not only defended herself but subtly held Conway responsible in front of the very crowd Conway sought to impress. Asterisk. Accountability also resonates because it reminds people that public figures don't exist in a vacuum. Conway's career has been marked by high-profile moments where she defended positions under scrutiny. Crockett's willingness to bring that history into the conversation showed that words aren't forgotten, and past choices matter. The audience didn't just hear Crockett responding in the moment. They were reminded of the larger context in which Conway had operated. That context made Crockett's clapback feel weightier, because it tied Conway's present critique to her past contradictions. Asterisk. The silence in the room after Crockett's response reflected how accountability can cut deeper than any sharp remark. People weren't stunned because Crockett yelled louder. They were stunned because she exposed a gap between Conway's criticism and her own record, and she did it calmly, factually, and without hesitation. It's difficult to recover from that kind of moment because it doesn't just challenge what was said in the room. It challenges the integrity of the person saying it. Asterisk. Conway's strength has always been in her ability to dominate conversations with confidence. But accountability is the one thing confidence alone cannot override. Crockett's clapback worked because it showed that when substance meets performance, substance has the final word. By putting Conway's own history under the spotlight, Crockett demonstrated that no amount of sharp delivery can erase the importance of consistency and credibility. It was accountability, not theatrics, that made her words linger long after the exchange ended. Asterisk. When Jasmine Crockett finished her reply to Kellyanne Conway, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that words alone couldn't capture. There wasn't a burst of applause or an eruption of noise right away. Instead, there was silence, a silence that spoke louder than any outburst ever could. That quiet moment was the clearest indicator of the impact Crockett's clapback had. It was a silence born not from confusion, but from recognition. Everyone present understood that they had just witnessed a response that cut through all the noise and left. No easy comeback for Conway. Asterisk. Silence is often overlooked in political exchanges because people expect debates to be loud, fiery, and filled with interruptions. Conway herself has long thrived in that environment, where tone and timing carry as much weight as content. She is skilled at keeping her opponents off balance, pushing them to react quickly and loudly, so that the conversation never rests long enough for reflection. But Crockett changed that rhythm. She didn't allow Conway's sharp tone to dictate the tempo. By staying calm, by staying measured, Crockett forced the room to listen differently. And when her words landed, the silence that followed showed how deeply they had been absorbed. Asterisk. That silence wasn't weakness, and it wasn't hesitation. It was respect. The audience didn't rush to fill the air with noise because they knew they had just heard something that carried weight. Crockett's words had challenged Conway in a way that didn't require volume. She had highlighted contradictions in Conway's record, and done so without theatrics. When the reply ended, the stillness gave space for the audience to process. In debates, that kind of pause is rare, and it only comes when a response leaves no easy path for the other person to retake control. Asterisk. For Conway, who often commands attention with her sharp delivery, the silence may have been the most difficult part of the exchange. Usually, her remarks are followed by chatter, applause, or at least some visible reaction that she can play off of. But here, there was none of that. Instead, she was left in a room where the audience's silence suggested that they were weighing Crockett's words more heavily than her own. In that still moment, Conway's tone lost its usual effectiveness because the attention had shifted completely away from her and toward the strength of Crockett's measured response. Asterisk. The power of silence lies in its ability to magnify. If the room had erupted into cheers immediately, Conway could have argued that the response was about performance or partisanship, but silence stripped away that excuse. It meant people weren't simply reacting emotionally, they were acknowledging the depth of what had been said. Crockett's ability to produce that kind of pause made her response even more powerful because it showed she didn't just win a point, she won the room's attention in full. Asterisk. That kind of silence also carries a ripple effect. Those who witnessed the exchange didn't just leave with the memory of Crockett's words, they left with the feeling of that pause. That moment when the air seemed heavier and the usual noise of debate gave way to reflection. In politics, those moments are rare but lasting. They create a memory not just of what was said, but how it made people stop, even briefly, to reconsider the balance of credibility in the room. Asterisk. For Conway, the silence worked against her. For Crockett, it was proof of her control. She had taken an attack meant to diminish her, and responded with such calm precision that the room could only sit with it. That's the kind of strength that doesn't fade quickly, because people remember not just the words but the quiet that followed them. Silence became the loudest part of the exchange, and it was a silence that underscored Crockett's authority in that moment. Asterisk. In the end, the power of Crockett's clapback wasn't just in what she said but in what came after. That speechless silence left the strongest impression, making it clear that calm, well-placed words can reshape an entire room more effectively than any sharp remark delivered with force. Asterisk. As the dust settled from the exchange between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett, the defining takeaway wasn't just about two women standing on opposite sides of a political divide, it was about the way ideas, delivery, and accountability intersect to create moments that last far beyond the walls of a debate hall. What began as a sharp critique from Conway evolved into a powerful lesson in how composure and substance can outshine even the most seasoned political strategist. Asterisk. Conway came into the room with her well-practiced style, a tone that has carried her through countless interviews, press briefings, and media appearances. Her confidence was undeniable, and her words landed with the precision of someone who knows how to command attention. Yet, despite her mastery of delivery, her criticism of Crockett lacked the deeper grounding that could sustain the weight of her sharp tone. It was a reminder that tone can capture a moment but not necessarily hold it. Asterisk. Crockett, on the other hand, approached the situation with a different strategy. She didn't attempt to outshout Conway or match her cadence. Instead, she relied on calm strength and deliberate substance. Her decision to remain steady not only neutralized Conway's energy, but also redirected the audience's focus. By anchoring her response in accountability, pointing to Conway's own record and contradictions, she shifted the narrative. What was intended as a critique of her inexperience became a reflection on Conway's own credibility. The silence that followed Crockett's clapback was the most telling part of the entire exchange. In politics, silence is rare. Rooms are usually filled with applause, murmurs, or interruptions. But in this moment, the absence of noise was the clearest indicator of impact. That silence belonged to Crockett. It was evidence that her words had landed with enough weight to still the room, forcing even those who might disagree to acknowledge the strength of her response. Moments like this matter because they strip away the theatrics that often cloud political debates. They remind audiences that at the heart of every clash, credibility is the true currency. Conway has long excelled at wielding tone as her weapon, but Crockett's response demonstrated that calm, grounded accountability has the power to dismantle even the sharpest delivery. It showed that strength isn't always loud, and that sometimes the most powerful response is the one spoken with control, clarity, and restraint. In the larger picture, this exchange was more than a headline. It was a reminder of how discourse can shift when one side refuses to be shaken and instead holds the other to their own standards. Crockett's reply didn't just silence the room. It reshaped the conversation about what it means to respond under pressure. The lesson is simple but enduring. Tone may draw attention, but it is substance, calm, strength, and accountability that leave a lasting mark. And in that moment, Jasmine Crockett made sure her words